Welcome to Chatham House and to this session on the future of Iran. And I don't think we could have picked a better time for it, could we? After the elections last week and an outcome which I think was a surprise to many people. Now, I have to check a couple of things. First of all, I have to introduce myself. I'm Lindsay Hilson, the international editor of Channel 4 News. This event is on the record. It's not Chatham House rules. And can everybody make sure that they have turned their phones off or onto silent? And the event's being live streamed, so if you have any reason not to want your face to be live streamed anywhere, then I don't know what you should do, hide under your chair or something. As you can see, we have two speakers. That's because our third speaker, Professor Ali Ansari, thought it started at 2 o'clock. He is in a taxi on his way here, and I shall wait until he arrives before publicly humiliating him. In the meantime, we have Arshin Adib Moghadam, who is a reader in comparative politics and international relations at SOAS. He's published 3 books on Islam, Iran, and world politics. And then on my right, I have Sharam Chubin, who is a non-resident senior associate for the nuclear program at the Carnegie Endowment. He's based in Geneva, and his research focuses on non-proliferation, terrorism, and Middle East security issues. And I'm sure you've seen him talk here before, and he's been a consultant to the US Defense Department, the RAND Corporation, the UN, a whole number of organizations. My original plan was I was going to get Ali, who, as you know, is a professor at St. Andrews, to talk first about the internal ramifications of the election and Hassan Rouhani coming to power. Then to get Arshin to talk about the regional implications, particularly Syria and so on, and then Sharam to talk about the nuclear issue and so on. But since Ali isn't here, we're going to sort of go backwards, but that's fine. So we're going to start with Arshin, and he is going to talk about the region, Syria, Iran. Oh, good heavens. Is that the nick of time?
Tehran time.
Tehran time, he says. I've already explained.
I'd like to blame it on the traffic.
It was because you were incompetent and you thought it started at 2.
Well, I was told it might start tomorrow, so it's a good thing I got the right day.
Ali Ansari, in case anybody doesn't know, is a professor of Iranian history, director of the Institute for Iranian Studies at the University of St. Andrews. He's also senior associate fellow at RUSI and vice president of the British Institute for Persian Studies. And his most recent book is The Politics of Nationalism in Modern Iran, none of which has taught him timekeeping. But, Ali, I was going to come to you first. Do you want to catch your breath?
Yeah, let me catch my breath.
Okay, in that case, I'm coming to you last. Arshin, if you want to go first. Thank you.
Well, it's the academic's predicament to stay at the lectern, so I will start here. I would talk about some of the continuities that we may expect with the election of Rouhani, and then maybe also some of the nuanced changes. The continuity is really, these are the strategic preferences of the Iranian state, and they don't really change with a change in administration or government. This is not very different from other states. States usually don't radically change their foreign policies with a change in administration. That holds true for Iran as well. So I foresee that Iran will continue to support the quest for a Palestinian state that has been on top of the agenda of the Iranian Islamic Republic since the revolution, a salient strategic preference, and I don't see Rouhani breaking with that strong norm that is embedded not only within the state, but also within Iranian society, with several NGOs being involved in supporting the quest for a Palestinian state. I think Iran will remain heavily engaged in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon via its alliance patterns with Hezbollah and some of the Shia movements in Iraq. Already, as we all know, I think Iran is on the ground in Syria and elsewhere. And again, I don't see how Rouhani can break from that policy. Iran will also oppose the Taliban movement in Afghanistan, and I think we will see a closer strategic dialogue between Iran, Russia, and India to that end. That will probably be a pattern that goes back to what happened before the NATO invasion in 2003, when Iran together with Russia and India, supported the Northern Alliance in opposition to the Taliban. Once the remnants of the NATO troops are out of Afghanistan, I think Iran is likely to escalate its engagement in Afghanistan as well. I think the aim of all of this really is to pacify Iran's borders as much as possible. I mean, this is the minimum aim of any country. And I think Iran has an interest in having neighbors that are not hostile to it. Hence its engagement in Syria, hence its engagement in Iraq. Pacifying the borders of Iran, one of the main purposes of Iran's regional strategic preferences. But what about the shifts? And I think there will be some nuanced shifts to be expected. I think Rouhani is likely to hark back on a dual-track approach in Iran's regional affairs, creating facts on the ground on the one side, but also, I think, emphasizing diplomacy. We saw during the Ahmadinejad years that Iran was not very good at finding diplomatic solutions to regional crises. The Ahmadinejad administration preferred to create facts on the ground and really undervalued the merit of diplomacy. I think with Rouhani, this will change. There will be an emphasis on diplomacy and at the same time, the engagement in the strategic theaters that I already mentioned. I think more specifically, we may expect a diplomatic charm offensive towards the GCC and Saudi Arabia in particular. We should not forget that Rafsanjani was amongst the main critics of the Ahmadinejad administration and its disregard of Saudi Arabia's powerful position in the region. I think Rouhani, probably even under the influence of Rafsanjani, will try to change that. And I think even in the short term, we may see a diplomatic charm offensive to that end, towards the GCC, and in particular towards Saudi Arabia. I think Iran is likely to reposition itself vis-à-vis the European Union in general and Britain in particular as well. I think Rouhani will have an interest in re-establishing full diplomatic relations with Britain. He will try to use the diplomatic channels that he's knowledgeable of to that end. And I think in general, he will try to use also the European Union as a potential interlocutor for direct talks with the United States. That used to be a taboo topic in the Islamic Republic. It isn't anymore. And implicitly, Rouhani already alluded to his interest to open up direct talks with the United States. I don't think that this is in the realm of impossibility in the middle to long term. And I think in general, we'll find a movement away from the rather venomous rhetoric of the Ahmadinejad years towards a language of reconciliation and dialogue. So he will frame the strategic preferences that I set out at the beginning of the talk with a new language. And language in itself is important, as we all know, in international affairs, and is the main component of international diplomacy. And Rouhani, as a politician, has the capability to talk diplomacy. So in conclusion, I think Iran will continue to adhere to the strategic preferences of the state, but it will embark on regional diplomacy in order to implement them. As such, we will experience a major shift in terms of language, which will beget a nuanced shift in terms of behavior. About specific questions, I hope we can talk about in the question-answer session. That's it.
Thank you very much. Sharon, do you want to go next?
It's on the spot.
I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to come back again. I enjoy very much coming to London, even in a very brief visit. I'm going to try and speak very fast so I can cover a lot of ground in a telegraphic fashion. And then if you want to, you can ask questions or clarifications later on. First, I think Iran is a society that's very divided and its elite is very fragmented, though the regime is not at all in peril. And in 2009, the supreme leader ended his role as arbiter by favoring one tendency. And the election, which was a charade, was clearly rigged, and the supreme leader lived to regret it. In 2013, there was a reversion to the role of arbiter, a correction, if you like, by the supreme leader. He moved back closer to the consent part of legitimacy as opposed to the coercion on the spectrum of consent coercion. So the election was about rebalancing, and it was a prudent re-legitimizing of the regime while also providing a safety valve for the populace. But is it also providing an occasion for a reset of policies toward the world? One preliminary comment. There was a lot of discussion about nuclear policy, but there was no discussion about the ends of Iran's nuclear program. A lot of discussion about the means, whether X had done a better job or done a bad job, who would be a better manager in managing the nuclear dossier. But there was no discussion about what the nuclear program was. Now, it seems to me there are three questions that have to be answered in relation to Iran's foreign relations after the election. One is, can a president make a difference? Two is, has the Supreme Leader changed his approach? And three is, can Rouhani deliver in foreign affairs, notably nuclear? Very briefly, a president can make a difference if the president is different. And this president, I think, is, like Khatami, different. Rouhani is a moderate, he's a pragmatic, he's a technocrat. If you read what he says, has said, and has written, he is, I'd say, a moderate internationalist with a genuine interest in the expansion of ties, because he believes Iran's revolutionary system will only work if it's better embedded in the international community. The president, of course, has a popular mandate, and we saw under Khatami and Ahmadinejad, as my predecessor mentioned, Ahmadinejad's view was very different about foreign policy. Khatami, as you recall, did two things in his period. He was allowed to do two things. One was to improve relations with the Gulf states, which were bad after the Iran-Iraq war. And two is he improved relations with the EU, notably Britain, in the light of Salman Rushdie and the edict, the fatwa on him. He was able to do those two things, deliver both those things. The president does make a difference. He can change the tone and atmospherics, as was mentioned earlier. Now the question is there scope for substantive change? Can he deliver real change? And I think that depends on two or three things. One is it depends on his leeway domestically. The default position of the Islamic Republic on security matters has been hardline. And in the case of Khatami and others, if the security agencies and hardliners and the Supreme Leader don't like the policies, they sabotage it, which happened to Khatami constantly, domestically and internationally. The second point I want to make is that we often forget that the nuclear issue, whether it's a strategic issue or a domestic issue, has been a political football domestically. Let me just itemize very briefly the times. In 2003, with the suspension, Rouhani was accused of having exchanged a piece of candy for a pearl by Larijani. This criticism from Larijani was accentuated by Ahmadinejad, and in 2006, when Larijani, the national security secretary at the time, negotiating with Solana, in 2006, his agreement was torpedoed by Ahmadinejad. Putin made some suggestions in 2007. Those were rejected. And in 2009, when Ahmadinejad tried to make an agreement in Geneva about the 20% uranium being shipped out, he was torpedoed by the reformists and the Greens. So everybody has used the nuclear issue for political domestic purposes. Is this going to change? In 2013, I should say the whole issue of the nuclear dossier was debated within the debates of the election. And it was very interesting. We can talk about some of it. At one point, people ganged up on Jalili for being too inflexible. And of course, Rouhani was constantly being criticized in the past for being too flexible and not getting anything. And that is going to be a handicap for the future, it seems to me, because he comes from a background, Rouhani, of being, from the hardline point of view, too accommodationists to the West and having received nothing. So, yes, the president can do something. The second, has the Supreme Leader changed his approach? This can be very brief. I don't think he's changed his approach. I think he thinks compromise is a slippery slope to regime extinction. He believes the nuclear issue is a pretext for pressure and for regime change. And he believes that defiance and resistance will maintain the regime more than making agreements in which Iran looks weak. So I don't think the Supreme Leader has changed his approach, but it may benefit him from having a president who's willing to be flexible, and then he can criticize that president for not having delivered the goods. The third question is, can Rouhani deliver in foreign affairs in general? Now, the nuclear issue has virtually monopolized foreign affairs. It's almost to the exclusion of everything else. And it's been said to be more important than the Iran-Iraq war, more important than the oil nationalization issue, and the most important issue that Iran has faced in the last century. This is saying a lot, so results have to be commensurate to the fact that it's the most important issue. Now, the important thing here is I think that without the nuclear issue being settled, there's very little scope for Iran's improvement of relations with the EU, or indeed with Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea, and other states. There's very little. The nuclear issue has really dominated that, though there's a human rights issue with Canada as well, and bilateral issue with the UK, and so on. So the nuclear issue is really in many ways the fulcrum around which other global relationships are there. Regionally, we've had an expression. I think one thing I would say about regionally is that Mr. Salehi, when he became foreign minister, said that his priority was improving relations with Saudi Arabia. And we've seen that hasn't gone anywhere since 2010. And the reason is the increasingly sectarian division and cleavage in the region as a result of the Arab Spring and as a result of the Iranians' involvement in Syria on the one hand, and the Arab states, GCC, and other states, Sunni states' willingness to confront Iran in Syria and elsewhere. There's very little scope for improvement there. Now, can he deliver on the nuclear program? It seems to me that to some extent he's handicapped by the past, because where in the Iranian storytelling, Iran was flexible, the P5 were adamant and inflexible. But on the face of it, the nuclear issue is not that difficult, I say, without the politics. It's really not too difficult to work out a way that Iran would be able to do enrichment and reassure the international community. The question is how much of a freeze, how much transparency, etc. Now, just to conclude, I think that, because we don't have to talk about what the shape of an agreement might look like, I would say a couple of things. One is, what Iran wants more than anything else is sanctions relief. Now, Rouhani referred to this yesterday. I think he expects first to stop more sanctions, and then secondly, hopefully, to start incrementally reducing the sanctions. There's one big problem with the sanctions relief, which is that depending on whether you're talking about UN sanctions, US Security Council sanctions, EU sanctions, or bilateral US sanctions, it's much easier for Iran to break any agreement that's made, if you like, whether it's about intrusive inspections or stopping centrifuges running, than it is for the international community, or the coalition, to reimpose sanctions. I think that that's an asymmetry that's rather difficult. It took a long time to get these sanctions into place, and lifting them would presume that you're not going to have to use them again. And what I'm saying is that there's an asymmetry here, because the lifting of sanctions is a rather difficult thing to do. The serious sanctions, depends which ones you're talking about. The banking sanctions are the crucial ones, I think, for the Iranians, but there are others. And there is that problem. And there's the problem of what the Iranians think that they would get in exchange for whatever it is they want to give up. A couple of things about Rouhani, and then I close. One is the atmospherics that was mentioned earlier by the earlier speaker, a more open, receptive, moderate tone, I think can reduce distrust in and of itself. But there are, of course, different levels to Iran's policy. And while Iran might be slightly accommodationist on the nuclear, it might be quite hardline on the Syria. And it seems to me that the two cannot really be separated when it comes to working out an arrangement. Even a technical fix would have this problem that Iran might be very active in supporting Assad, while the West is reducing sanctions, for example, on the nuclear program. Secondly, Iran's hardliners may have to accept some constraints on the program, which, in light of the past, as we've seen as a political football, they may not accept. Third, it seems to me, and this is important, the P5+1 are going to have to agree on a reasonable package. Let me just simply conclude by saying that reasonable package would have to take yes for an answer from Iran, would have to include some enrichment, probably no rollback, maybe some freeze, but no rollback of the program. And without already the atmospherics are such that without a flagrant provocation of Iran going over the threshold or weaponizing, the prospects of a military strike, I think, are receding, and receding even more if someone like Rouhani becomes the spokesman for Iran's foreign policy. So I think we're setting ourselves up for the continuation of a stalemate in a better atmosphere. In other words, a sustainable stalemate.
Thank you very much. Ali, can you enlighten us a bit about the domestic implications of Rouhani's victory and the reasons for it?
Thank you very much, and once again, apologies for my poor timing. I noticed one of my former students in the audience, so all is forgiven, Guy, for being late to class. I've got 5 to 7 minutes to talk a little bit about the internal politics, and it has been an interesting few days, and I'll put my hands up first and say I did not see this coming, just in case anyone asks whether I had or not. No, I did not think that actually Rouhani would be able to pull through. He pulled through with a very, very slight margin, it has to be said. Some of the figures are now coming through. It seems to be that he won his election with about 250,000 votes. That's very narrow, but it also indicates that if they had wanted to rig it, they would have done. I mean, on that level, it's very easy to switch a couple of percentage points and put it into a second round, and they didn't. And the question has to be asked, why did they allow someone like this, who had said the things he did, to come through? Because one of the striking things that I think to come of it is that, yes, for the sake of a sort of a popular mandate and a popular legitimacy for the system, after the debacle of 2009, and there's a couple of things I'll mention about that too, it's come at some cost. And some of the things that Rouhani said, and some of the things that he said during the campaign, and his supporters and others, and particularly also around Rafsanjani's sort of failed registration, so to speak, have been quite dramatic. I mean, they've been really quite striking, what has been said. It's not simply a reboot of the Islamic Republic, not simply going back to the days of the reform period or Rafsanjani's period. He's actually asking, he's basically saying the last 8 years have been a disaster. We've had a securitized atmosphere. What we need is to lift that. We need to have greater freedom in the universities. We have to have greater freedoms in general in society as a whole. If you look at the points he made in his press conference yesterday, although he qualified many of them, and one would have to expect that in some ways, he did make some quite striking points about implementing the Constitution, and particularly those areas that deal with individual rights. Now, this is sort of language, of course, that the liberal, progressive, centrist, whatever you want to call them, it's music to their ears. And the question has to be, was this all talk to get people out to vote, or is he actually going to do something about it? And this is something that I think when you look at the population and the people that voted for him, and again, the pattern is quite interesting because we're just getting figures in really now in the breakdown, it seems to be, and I'm quite surprised at this actually, and again, it goes counter to some of the received wisdom we had last time round, Rouhani didn't actually do that well in the major cities. He did much better in the smaller cities and the villages. So it seems to be actually that if there is a sort of a silent moderate majority, if we may put it that way, it's far more extensive throughout the country than obviously those supporters of Ahmadinejad would like us to believe, that Ahmadinejad's support in the countryside wasn't quite so great. But what is striking is he lost Tehran. He lost Tehran, apparently. He got about 46%, according to the figures, so that's quite interesting. Obviously, he must have shared that to some extent with Ghalibaf. But Ghalibaf himself lost Mashhad, which is also interesting. So there are some interesting diversities in view. It seems that where Rouhani did rather well was in Azerbaijan, funnily enough. So that sort of, it's an interesting dive, not in Tabriz necessarily, but again, more in the rural areas. So this gives us a slightly different geography to the electorate. But it does, even though you've had a reasonably high turnout, what does it also say about the political views of Iranians? And this, of course, would be music to my ears, I have to say, as those of you who know my work in the past, that here you have a large tranche of sort of a centrist group in Iran who are really after what we would consider to be sort of the moderate center of the vote, because the person who got really hammered in this election was Jalili. I think Velayati also didn't do very well. I heard that he went to hospital on Saturday, which probably was maybe a consequence of his very poor showing, who knows. But Ghalibaf and Rouhani did rather well. And Rouhani in particular, with some of the things he was saying, has basically challenged the narrative of the last 8 years, and certainly the last 4 years. So let me just give you a couple of examples so we're aware of what we're heading into or what we might be heading into. In the first place, of course, they said this is a triumph against extremism. It's against extremism and for moderation. Now, of course, one may say extremism on left and right, but one of the pointed remarks, of course, one of the pointed ideas is, of course, what Ahmadinejad represented, and also let's not forget what the Supreme Leader supported. Okay, I mean, I think one of the things that I find quite interesting about certainly some of the commentariat in the post is suddenly that Khamenei is actually a genuine democrat. I think not. And, Iran is a democracy. No, Iran is not a democracy, but Iran hopefully now will be put back on the track that we were seeing back in the days of sort of Khatami and others. That what was happening in terms of the consolidation of power in one direction is now hopefully shifting. It's far too early to say what's going to happen. And of course, the million-dollar question that we've had also from Arshin and Shahram saying is, to what extent do we think these ideas are going to be implemented? So the ideological thing has been completely subverted. Politics, we no longer want to live in a securitized atmosphere. We want to free up the political situation. We want to allow students and journalists. Rouhani said yesterday the Journalists Association should be allowed to reform. Civil society organizations should be allowed to reform. Of course, within the boundaries of the law. But, this is a good start at least. At least what he's saying is people should not be persecuted or prosecuted for their religious or political beliefs. This is a major step. If he implements it, we're on, this is something that is worth celebrating. One of the most interesting things that's come out of it, he said, we're not going to allow, and this, for those of you who know Iran, actually, where he said, any insults and offenses made against people, nobody will be allowed to go around being rude to people in the way that obviously Mr. Ahmadinejad was in a way, and they're going to enact laws. So for the first time, it seems to be that Iran is going to get a set of libel laws. This should be rather interesting. So, I mean, if these are actualized, these have got to be good. If, and I'm qualifying that very heavily because this is the question mark. I don't see Rouhani as a moderate, by the way. I see him as a pragmatist. I think if you look back, and people have said, if you look back to what he said in the last 4 years, he's not always said very nice things, I have to say. I think he's often said rather opportunistic things. But the thing that for me is interesting is that who are the kingmakers at the moment? Who are the kingmakers? It's a very interesting alliance between Rafsanjani and Khatami. And those who said Khatami was finished or Rafsanjani was finished, well, maybe we find that they're back. And this will be interesting for me to see what happens. And this leads me to another point which I think is perhaps more interesting in terms of why this has happened now. A lot of us have argued that the situation in which the country was going down over the last 8 years was unsustainable, that political and economic pressures were mounting, and this wouldn't be sustainable in the long term, and particularly obviously with sanctions and others, because one has to ask, what is the difference between Mir Hussein Mousavi and Rouhani? Why not let Mir Hussein Mousavi, he's an insider. He could have won in 2009 or in a runoff. We could have avoided the last 4 years of pain. But for some reason, something has changed now. And in my view, my reading of it is that for the first time, the elites have buckled, in a sense. The elites have said enough. And if you look at the elites, they've gone, I think, to the Supreme Leader and others and said, we cannot afford to go through certainly what we did in 2009, and we certainly cannot afford to continue down a path which is just leading us to disaster. And if you look at the words of Motahari, Ali Motahari, a noted principalist, and he said very clearly, he said in the run-up, he said, the people will not be deceived again. The people will not be deceived again. Now, one of the things that I think, if for those of you who watched the vote, let me just recap for the benefit of those of us who might still think last time round was free and fair. Last time round, they counted 42 million votes, or certainly they counted the definitive result of the votes by 4 a.m. in the morning, because it was all computerized, apparently. This time, there wasn't a computer to be found, okay? And it took them till 6 p.m. to count 36 million votes. And the joke in Iran, of course, is that this is the first time they bloody well counted the votes. That's why it's taken them so long. But this is interesting. I mean, it's interesting, okay? And I think it should lay to rest once and for all. And I think people have actually, when you look at what's being said in Iran, and you look at what people are saying in Iran, they're saying finally, this is the election we should have had in 2009. We have taken your vote back, Mousavi. And when they call what they're saying, and this for me is a litmus test. I mean, I have to say, what's going to happen? Are we going to see something? Let's see if he does manage to get Mousavi and Karoubi released. Let's see if the political prisoners are released. And if they are, then I think we have turned a page. And we are on a different track. But bear in mind that almost every narrative we've been sold over the last 4 to 5 years is being radically undermined. The economy is not in good shape, clearly. We were told it was in good shape. The politics are not in good shape. Ahmadinejad would have had us believe that Iran was a superpower on the way to whatever. Okay? The nuclear one is also interesting, but I'll leave it to the others. But I was very interested in what Rouhani said yesterday. He said, we're completely transparent on our nuclear policy, but we think we can be more transparent. So you can make of that what you wish. Okay, so the point of the matter is that there is room for maneuver, and what's been the most striking thing and the most refreshing thing, and for me, to be honest, it brings tears to my eyes, I have to say, tears to my eyes, that at last, within the Iranian body politic, there has been a semblance of a rational discussion about what the hell is going on and how they must maximize their strengths within a very complicated scenario. And mark my words, on Syria, it was very interesting in the press conference yesterday. But it shows Rouhani's limitations, and I'll end on a slightly sour note, but not for want of trying. But one is that when he talked about Syria, he said the future of Syria will be dependent on the Syrian people themselves. And the journalists started to clap. And then immediately he realized that this might be a little bit too much and said, but of course, you know, we oppose this and we oppose that and we'll obstruct this and we'll obstruct that. But it tells us there's a mood in Iran. There's a mood in Iran that they don't want this sort of confrontation anymore. Of course they're proud of the country. Of course they want the country to be strong, but not in the way that people have tried to present it. Now, unfortunately, on the other side, for those of you who can access this, Mr. Hossein Shariat-Madari, one of obviously the best editors that the world could have found, for Kayhan newspaper, wrote a thundering editorial in which he said, by the way, any of you who think that anything is going to change, think again. And he pointedly sort of debunked every single argument that people might have said. He said, Rouhani is a staunch conservative, he'll do as he's told, and he made the point. And this is the crux. It's been the central debate in Iranian politics for the last 20 to 30 years. It will need to be resolved one way or another sooner or later, and this is who has the last word. Yeah, who has the last word? And Shariat-Madari said, all you people shouting and cheering in the streets, don't get too carried away. The president is simply the executive officer. Policy is made elsewhere. And if that is the situation, ladies and gentlemen, then we are no further forward. But I am certainly hoping for another direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.